Hello and welcome to our June 360 presentation. I am Curator of Education Anna Smith, and today it's my pleasure to introduce Tod Lippy, the editor and founder of ESOPUS magazine. Calling ESOPUS a magazine is like calling Ulysses a beach read. Every issue is a treasure trove of art and artifact, lovingly crafted with foldouts, paste-ins, lavish images, and document facsimiles. As you flip through its pages, you get the sense that you're being allowed to wander through the archives of the world's coolest museum. First, you may encounter a commissioned project by one of your favorite artists, then a sketchbook or an object file. You may stop for an unexpected conversation with an insightful security guard or watch a few pivotal moments of a great film. And on top of that, it comes with a CD and fits on your coffee table. Tod Lippy is the editor of ESOPUS magazine and president of the ESOPUS Foundation, which also runs the alternative exhibition and performance venue, ESOPUS Space. Formerly, Lippy was the editor and co-founder of Scenario, the magazine of screenwriting art, the publisher and co-editor of Public Sphere magazine, and a senior editor at Print magazine. He is the author of the book Projections 11, New York Filmmakers on Filmmaking, and his 1999 short film, Cookies, was featured in over 20 film festivals in the US and abroad. I know we're all looking forward to hearing from the mind behind the magazine, so please join me now in welcoming Tod Lippy.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a true honor to be at the Nasher to speak. I have some history in Texas. I went to TCU way back when, and I would say that my first real interest in art and the arts came from being there, both from being in their art and art history departments and also having those incredible museums in Fort Worth to wander through as an undergraduate, so it's great to be back. I thought I would just basically take you through the genesis of ESOPUS, the ideas behind it, and start. Anna's already done a good job of giving you a sense of where I come from, but just quickly giving you a sense of where I started. If I can get the, there we go. So as she mentioned, after graduate school, I basically backed into a job as an editorial assistant at Print magazine, which was a wonderful, really highly respected visual culture magazine, mostly devoted to graphic design, but other things as well. I spent 6 years there, ended up as a senior editor, and while I was there, I started a little magazine on my own called Public Sphere with a friend of mine, Pamela Ivinsky. And it was, I always kind of think of it as sort of an angry adolescent version of ESOPUS. It was a little rougher and a little more, I don't know, cantankerous, I guess, but the idea was the same. We had 3 artist projects in every issue. We had critical writing, we had invitationals, visual essays, that kind of thing. That lasted for 3 issues, but it was a for-profit venture in name only. So it didn't last very long. But that kind of led to the 3rd magazine that I co-founded, and that was called Scenario, which Anna mentioned was a literary kind of journal for screenwriting. So I left that after about 3 years, and I spent several years trying to make a feature film. I made some short films. I did a book. And kind of in the end of that whole process, I got very nostalgic for the magazine publishing world. And there were several things in particular I really loved about it. One, it's the kind of thing where you create something and you get very intensely involved in it, and then, you know, whether it's a monthly or a quarterly or whatever, that period is over and you start completely from scratch and begin again on a whole new process of creativity. That's a very exciting, very vital process. The other thing I loved about it was that you create something and it immediately is distributed to an audience and you get feedback. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but at least it's a response, which is, I think, very important for anybody who does anything that's creative. But there were some things I didn't love so much about magazine publishing, and this is a shot I took at an airport recently of a bunch of mostly general interest magazines, but you all kind of know the formula for how it works with the, yeah, it's celebrities on the cover, usually a lot of cover lines. This is sort of the distilled version of the horror of general magazine publishing for me. This is from 8 years ago, and the fact that Paris Hilton isn't quite as hot as she was then makes it even more pungent to me, but this is, to me, everything that's wrong with magazine publishing. It's hideously designed. It's filled with text that's literally shouting at you. It's the equivalent of sort of being yelled at by someone. They're all the classic hallmarks of sales items to get you interested. There's the celebrity, there's the kitten, there's the catch where it's hot, you know, celebrity, sexy, addiction, addicted. You know, it's this whole kind of approach that I just really didn't want to replicate. So that was one thing I was trying to avoid. The other thing that I decided very early on was that I did not want to have advertising in the magazine at all. I find that it's a very disruptive process for me when I'm looking through a magazine and I literally start to have trouble finding the editorial content and discerning it from the advertising content. This is a completely unwitting, I'm sure, unplanned juxtaposition, but again, I just find it very difficult to focus on either one of those pages. They both seem to be kind of demanding an equal amount of attention from me. Here's another great example. You know, the car ad on the left, or sorry, on the right, and then on the left, it's editorial, but no, actually it's not editorial. That's an ad as well. It's just designed to look like editorial. If you look at the top, it says special promotional material. So this kind of thing was really something I wanted to avoid. Again, a New Yorker ad sponsored by Chevron. They actually hired New Yorker cartoonists to do advertisements that related to Chevron. And these were postcards that could be pulled out of the magazine. It's become so, this is a recent issue of GQ, and it's become so prevalent that actually these are one page after the other. On the left, that's the advertising table of contents, which is incredibly easy to read and very prominent. On the left, I can barely read the actual table of contents for the issue, which to me kind of sums the whole thing right up. And this isn't just general interest magazines. I love Art Forum. I'm a subscriber for many, many years. But it's interesting that the Marion Goodman Gallery has a much more prominent and easy to read table of contents, basically, for their upcoming exhibitions than the magazine itself. So basically, the idea was trying to avoid those pitfalls, particularly advertising, particularly anything that was commercially driven. And avoiding these kinds of covers that literally felt like you were looking at a catalog. So when I started the magazine in 2003, I decided I would do covers that had absolutely no information on them other than an image. And the optimistic hope was that this would be something that's so different from everything else on the newsstand that it would compel people to want to open it up and look inside. And some of the images on the covers have not related to any content on the inside, and then some actually have, these are all sort of just vague images that are meant to be mysterious enough to hopefully make you want to open the magazine. This is our first special issue from 2006. It's a process issue devoted to creative process. And for that, this sort of relates a little bit more to the idea of workbooks and notebooks and things like that. More recently, this is ESOPUS 17. We started to feature covers that relate to content in the issue. This is a beautiful photograph by Inge Morath. I'm sure some of you are familiar with her work, the late photographer. It's a series of images from a charity ball in Paris in the 40s that were never published, that we had the opportunity to publish in the issue. This is a slightly more recent issue. It's a cover by Brian Nash Gill, and actually is, it's actually embossed, so it does really feel like a woodcut, which is a nice kind of surprise. A more recent issue, Sharon Core project on the cover. We changed formats a little bit here and there to sort of keep things interesting, hopefully for ourselves and the readers as well. So basically, with no ads, we suddenly had all this great prime real estate. You know, ads are always the first thing you open when you see the magazine, or the first thing you see when you open the magazine are ads on the first page, the inside front cover. So we had suddenly had all this wonderful space to give to artists. So we do 3 artist projects in every issue. This is the first page of the first issue, and it's a project by Chris Doyle, who's a New York-based artist who does video projections, animations, but he also does these really beautiful series of exquisite little watercolors of houses. So this was in the first issue, and they basically appeared where all the ads would normally be opposite the table of contents, the editor's note, that kind of thing. This is an artist project in the 4th issue by Ed Ruscha, who did a series of altered book covers for us. And the idea was he really wanted not to do a contiguous series of images, but to sort of pepper them throughout the magazine. So it was my kind of pleasure to be able to put them next to things that seemed to make sense for the images themselves. That's on the right is a really wonderful article about ice cream truck music and the origin of that. This is a great project by Neil Goldberg, also based in New York. He spent about a month in the subways in New York, and he decided he would try to videotape people as they ran to catch a train and missed it. And the subject is, the project is called Missing the Train, and they're really beautiful, kind of heroic images of people who didn't quite make it to the train. But they're really great. This is also in the first issue. It's a project by Beth Campbell, also a sculptor, a terrific sculptor. And she does these series of drawings called My Potential Future Based on Present Circumstances, where she'll make a decision, and then she'll literally play out in a flow chart, hand-drawn, every possible permutation of what could happen based on that decision. And this was a 10-panel fold-out, so it just went and went and went with hilarious conclusions to her decision, basically. In the third issue, we were lucky enough to work with Jenny Holzer, and she did a project for us based on recently declassified government memoranda that related to Abu Ghraib, the whole scandal that was breaking when this issue came out. And when I spoke with her, she said, do you think there's anything we could do with disappearing ink? And I did some research, and I found a place that actually had something called photochromatic ink. And when it gets sunlight, it actually charges. So these pages were blank in the magazine. There were 16 contiguous pages. And I guess it's a good point to say I don't really like to over-describe contemporary art in the magazine. It's very important to me that people can approach it on their own terms. So, and Jenny definitely agreed, and she said, you know, let's say as little as possible about me or what I do or my other work. So in the table of contents, I just said these documents must see the light of day. And a lot of people complained that the issue was defective because they hadn't taken it out into the sunlight. But to me, it was, and that was good for a number of reasons. One, it felt like this wasn't just going to art people, which is very important. Also, a big part of our mission is to get it to a broader audience. But it also thought it was important that a lot of people did not call, so obviously they did have that opportunity to literally have that visceral experience of seeing these things appear before their eyes, which gave them a sense of agency in the whole process of declassifying, basically. This is a project by Richard Mizrak from the 5th issue. We do often with artist projects, we'll have things that come out of the magazine. It's a wonderful poster based on his On the Beach series. It's a very large, it's about, I don't know, 36 by 18 or 19. This is one of my favorite projects we've ever done. It's Sarah Malikoff, who's an artist based in Brooklyn. Actually, Boston now, formerly Brooklyn. And she does these really wonderful psychologically charged interior photographs. And she decided that she would do suites of these, and then we would get specialty paper to mirror the elements in the rooms that she was photographing. So that was actually related to the shuttered doors in this photograph. This is the Charlie White project. Charlie's from LA. Probably many of you know of his work. He did a film and a series of audio works based on basically adolescent girls and their interests and how culture kind of tries to attract them with various things. So he collected a ton of young adult girl magazines, you know, Cheerleader, 17, et cetera, and he decided for his project just to basically reproduce what his binder filled with these covers looked like. So we actually, through varnish and a use of a special stock, kind of replicated the feel of the binder of images, which was a lot of fun to be able to do. Mary Lum is based in Massachusetts. She did this project for ESOPUS 18. She does these wonderful collages based on walks she takes through Boston and also Paris. This was an incredibly complicated project to pull off. It was over 100 die cuts, and it took about 3 days just to run through a machine to get all these correct, but it turned out beautifully, I think. William Christenberry, who, again, probably many of you know, based in Washington, did this project for issue 2, a pop-up house based on a sculpture of his that he'd done many years before, and a photograph that the sculpture was based on from the 70s. Baron Strick, Amsterdam-based artist, did a piece that involved, a lot of his paintings involved hand sewing. So we actually did something where we had a group of Hutterites, which is a religious colony close to the Mennonites based up in Canada where we print, hand sew enough of these. We couldn't do enough for the entire run of the magazine, which is 10,000 copies, but we did enough for subscribers. So it was sort of a special deal for subscribers. And finally, in the most recent issue, this is a wonderful project by Penny McCarthy based in London, who hand draws pages from books, from memos, and in the center, there's a huge poster that folds out a drawing of hers. So we have a lot of artist projects, 3 in every issue. We've done, I guess, over 50 at this point. But I also really love being able to reproduce and feature art by people who may not even consider themselves to be artists, or perhaps, you know, had a very lauded life as an artist and have since passed away. This is a guy named Ulysses Davis, who was a barber in Savannah. I ran across his work when I was in Savannah about 10 years ago. And he did this amazing series of carvings. He carved constantly of all the US presidents. And we did a very long fold out of all of these. They're really extraordinary, extraordinary images. Mark Hogenkamp. Has any one of you seen Marwan Call, the film, the documentary? It's a really amazing film about this guy, made by an ESOPUS subscriber who learned about him from this piece. He's a man who was living in upstate New York, had been attacked viciously by a bunch of guys in a bar parking lot and left for dead, had horrible brain damage, and he decided to regain his faculties basically by creating a town in his backyard, a scale model town filled with dolls. And the dolls kind of basically act out his attack and his recovery. Every doll has a doppelganger, or basically a reference point that is an actual person. So these are all photographs of dolls that are shot beautifully on an old 35 millimeter camera that he would have developed the film developed at the local drugstore. And a friend of mine happened to live across the street from him, and we were able to publish these for the first time. And he's since gone on. There's actually a film in the works by Robert Zemeckis about him, which is very exciting, the guy who made Forrest Gump. And so he's an amazing person. And finding someone like that is a very exciting thing for me, obviously. Alex Brown was a 13-year-old kid, a son of a friend, who did these really extraordinary battle drawings, which almost feel like Henry Darger or something. They're incredibly obsessive and meticulous. And that we actually did a cover of that issue with one of these drawings. This is a man named Robert Guest, who's an exhibition designer in New York, who every day sent these very detailed and beautiful poetic notes to his two kids when they went off to school, from the time they were in pre-K until they graduated from high school. So we did a series of these as well, and then the cover was how he would fold them to put them into their lunch boxes. This is more recent. It's a man who's a Crate and Barrel night manager at a furniture, an outlet, a Crate and Barrel outlet, and he does these fun little Post-it notes, which are kind of terrific too. We also do, it's not just art. One of the main points of the magazine is not to be an art magazine, not to be a film magazine, not to be a design magazine. I don't want to be ghettoized by distributors or on the newsstand, and I really want as broad of an audience as possible. So we do writing. This is a wonderful series of monologues by Stephen Adly Guirgis, the New York-based playwright. I mean, again, it's very object-oriented. This character who writes these monologues is this very lovelorn, kind of sad sack guy based in New York whose girlfriend has moved back to Texas, interestingly. And he's writing these incredibly sad but very funny letters saying how much he misses her. And I remember him saying, can we do something more creative? I don't want to just type it on a page. He's the kind of guy who would be such a loser, he wouldn't have any paper, so he would type it on like a bag that he found, for a card that he bought. So I actually managed to pull that off. These are one of 23 drafts of a poem by Suji Kwa Kim, the New York-based poet. She allowed us to publish all the drafts, which is exciting for me. It was in the creative process issue. But this is a real window into the process of creating something, and that's very exciting for me, and I think it's great for our readers to access that process. Again, Anna mentioned we do a series called Guarded Opinions, where we ask museum guards to talk about the work that they oversee, and the point being that they probably spend more time, many of them, with a work of art than even the artist spent making it, and have very interesting perspectives often. We do things with various types of creative practitioners. Christopher Wheeldon, the New York City ballet choreographer, wrote a wonderful piece about choreographing. Jody Williams, a wonderful chef, wrote about learning how to cook in Italy. Frank Rich, who was for quite some time a columnist at the New York Times, did a piece about, basically that page represents one of his columns in the Times, and he always writes them out in very tiny type. So we reproduce that full size. David Quarfoot is a cruciverbalist who does crossword puzzles for the New York Times. He wrote a piece basically constructing a puzzle from scratch, which is totally fascinating. In the new issue, Michael Arad, the designer of the 9/11 Memorial, wrote about the process of literally being in New York on 9/11, and from that point up until he won the competition for the memorial. And this is a wonderful piece, very illuminating. Includes a series of photos of the underground memorial galleries, which some of you may be aware of were never actually built for lots of good and political reasons. But it was a great opportunity for him to show his original vision in the magazine, which is very important to us. There's a game collective called Local Number 12, and in ESOPUS 17, they created a game out of, I think there were 120 cards in each issue, and there were 3 different sets, so you could get three issues and get 360 cards. It's a wonderful card game, basically on how to inspire cultural debate among people, and that was a big hit for us as well. We do a thing with film, and I'd say every other issue called 100 Frames, where we'll feature contiguous and also just random frames from various films, many that haven't been that well distributed in the US. This is a Chantal Akerman film called La Captive. It's a Bruce Conner film from the 60s. We asked Doug Akin to write the introduction for, and he wrote this really beautiful poem. And that is a fold-out poster that actually comes out. Apichatpong Virasetakun, the Thai director, did a wonderful 100 frames for his film Tropical Malady. Charles Burnett, if any of you have seen Killer Sheep, the wonderful 70s film, we did 100 frames from that. And then most recently, we did 100 frames from Blue Velvet, which was a huge thrill for me because it's one of my favorite films. And the idea is to mix up the design, so sometimes it's a page with 30 frames, and sometimes it's a blow-up of just one particularly resonant image. I really love found objects, and I really love archives. That's kind of my obsession. I sort of fetishize them a little bit. So we'll often do a series where we'll ask people who found something at a yard sale or a thrift shop or inherited from someone to give us the objects, and then we'll do a reproduction of them. These are cards from San Francisco prostitutes in the 40s that were found in an estate sale of a vice cop in San Francisco in the 70s. And they remind me a lot of, do you know blow-in cards? You know what blow-in cards are? These kind of, they fall out in your lap whenever you open the magazine. You don't want them. They're very kind of forward, and I kind of thought there's some kind of weird, relationship between those and these cards, these business cards. So they actually fall out of the magazine, and the cards that we reproduce as actual cards are 2 cards from the same woman, but obviously signed at different times, which I found to be incredibly poignant, and it's very telling about the whole nature of her profession. This is a wonderful series of letters written to a woman named Zora Shirey. I can't remember her name. Zola Shirey. And she, in 1930, graduated from college and wanted to get a job in the hotel industry and sent this, that was her draft of her letter. A design person named Stephen Heller, who's a big design author and historian, found these in Great Barrington in a thrift shop. And they're 30 rejection letters that she saved. Which are beautiful objects because they're these gorgeous letterheads, and they're very personably written. They're not form letters. They're people who actually bothered to respond. But they're such a great testament to tenacity, disappointment, and tenacity at the same time. And I found them really moving. We worked with a man who unfortunately passed away recently named Alex Shear, who had an incredible collection of ephemera. And we do something called Alex Shear's Object Lesson. We did about 6 of these. And he would have these crazy, crazy, eccentric groupings of objects. He had hundreds of thousands of objects. This was a series of objects shaped like guns that we did on a poster. And they're really, kids' toothbrushes, hair dryers, truly crazy stuff. This is another one of his. Just very fun things that really speak to pop culture and this kind of detritus that builds up over time. So one of my favorite things related to archives that we do in every issue is a series with the Museum of Modern Art Archives. It's called Modern Artifacts, and in every issue we publish items from the archives that have never been seen before, for the most part, by the public. And they range from anything. I mean, we've done now, I guess, 14 of these. This is a wonderful one on an exhibition that MoMA planned to have in 1941 they called it Exhibition X, but it was literally meant to be an exhibition designed to wrest America from its isolationist stance and basically convince Americans that they had to go to war. So we produced a blueprint of the exhibition plan. These are the sketches of what the halls were going to look like. They were going to literally raise the garden and build a pavilion in the back of MoMA. It never happened, and it was never published or broadcast. So it's kind of exciting to be able to feature that in the magazine. These are some of the, there's a telegraph, there's various things that come in. It's very important for things to come out of the magazine so you feel like you're literally looking through a box of objects as opposed to flipping through a magazine. It's a wonderful series of correspondence from James Lee Byers to Dorothy Miller, the curator at MoMA for many, many years. They had a very intense relationship, and he would send these truly incredible letters. And we would use, in this case, we used a paper that was very similar to the Japan paper used for the letters. This was donated very often because we're a nonprofit. It's possible to ask, like the ink for Jenny Holzer's project was also something that we kind of got for free by really pushing hard to get as much as we could without having to pay for it, basically. So it's worked out very well, and we've been able to do some things we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. This is a reproduction of the museum's first guest book. You can see George Gershwin, Albert Einstein is on there somewhere. It's an amazing group of names, and it's very fun to just flip through and try to figure out who is actually in there. This is a piece related to the museum's rent-to-own program, where they actually had a rental component of the Museum of Modern Art, where you could go up and buy, Picasso drawings for $200 or Jasper John's drawing. It's really an incredible resource. And this is a reproduction of the actual brochure for the program. We do something with the Magnum photo archives in about every other issue. They're an amazing resource. The image of the Inge Morath image I showed you was one of these archival items. These are other images from that series by her of this Paris ball. We did something recently in ESOPUS 19. It was a series of photographs by Burke Glynn of a woman who was a pigeon dancer in Coney Island in the 40s. And we ran about 40 of these. They're amazing images, especially one after the other. And I should mention, when I'm talking about archives, we celebrated our 10th anniversary last fall. And for that basically occasion, I decided to do a special issue devoted entirely to archives. And this is ESOPUS 20, which is a little bigger than usual, and it was designed differently. It was basically a bunch of folders, each containing particular material related to some kind of archival source. So it ran the gamut from Matt Weiner gave us his notes for Mad Men, which is an incredible thing to read through. We had 30 pages of these. A crazy collector in Massachusetts collects used coloring books. They're really incredible. Steven Sprouse, the designer, a series of his notebooks, sketchbooks, patterns, et cetera. That was a really amazing thing to be able to show as well. This is a Mark Dion project. He went to the Museum of Natural History in New York and scoured their images for basically the creation of all the dioramas. And we did a fairly, I think it was 24 pages of amazing images of that process as well. So each issue closes with a CD, which Anna also mentioned. They're themed, and the idea is to make sure that people who are going to contribute actually write new songs, because often in magazines who have CDs or which have CDs, the CDs will be previous release material or material that didn't make it onto the artist album. So the idea is to make it so specific that the musicians have to literally create something from scratch. So we've done, the themes really, again, run the gamut. We asked musician couples to write songs about misconnections ads on Craigslist. This is a wonderful one. We asked our readers to send in descriptions of their imaginary friends when they were kids, if they had them. And then musicians each picked a friend and wrote a song about the friend. We gave musicians Ouija boards and asked them to write a song about their experience with the board. Some were very scary and earnest, and others were very ironic. This is a spam email, trying to make something good out of something that's really awful, basically, in this case. Good news. Anybody who found something that they felt was good news, and interpretations were pretty broad on that one. Irrational fears, we asked our subscribers to send in their most irrational fear, and musicians also made songs based on those as well. So, and I mentioned we had a space called ESOPUS space for, I guess it was 3 years. We had a 3-year lease. We opened it when we got a very generous grant from the Andy Warhol Foundation. And we had 3 years of programming. It was a really wonderful experience. We did exhibitions. This is actually an exhibition of Mark Hogenkamp's more recent photographs. This is a Jason Polin exhibition, another New York-based artist who is very interested in working with people on the artworks he creates, and he had an image archive based in those filing cabinets that he made available to anyone who came in, who could then Xerox, cut up, and create new images that lined the walls of the gallery over the space of the month that the show was up. We did concerts. This is Sam Amidon, the wonderful singer-songwriter and folk interpreter who did a very intimate show for our audience. And basically, you know, we have a website. Oh, sorry, one more thing. We also do, in addition to the projects that appear in the magazine, we ask artists to also do editions for us, mostly for fundraising, but also because they're things that we can't feature in the magazine. And I think because the magazine tries to be a sculptural object in a lot of ways, there's just certain things that can't fit into that format. This is a really amazing multiple that Robert Gober did for us 2 years ago. It was actually done because we skipped an issue in order to move to Brooklyn and also to create a new website. And he did this. It's the mailer, or it resembles the mailer that each issue comes in. And the multiple is the mailer itself. It's an image that he created. And the name of the road, actually Hopeville Road, is the road he grew up on as a kid. It's a really beautiful object. And that was given to subscribers as a gift for their patience, basically. We've done projects with Kay Rosen. These are a series of Christmas cards she did a few years ago for us. Ho, ho, ho is the punchline of that one. Robert Therian did an amazing multiple for us early on. It's a series of 4 napkins and a tablecloth that he hand silkscreened each one. So basically each one is really an original object. And finally, we do have a website where we have lots of information about the magazine, about past content. We have video links. We have a lot of the audio material available for download. So that's basically it. I'm happy to take any questions. It's a thrill to be here, and thank you for listening. Anybody? Yes?
One is, what does ESOPUS mean?
Oh, good question.
And
You go ahead.
the other one, you mentioned that you want the magazine to be a collection of items beyond just the print. Concept that I thought of Canada in the 1980s called Jackdaws.
Sure, yeah, it's a great publication.
There was a handful of magazines that tried that for a while, and unfortunately, I guess they failed. Probably a lot of them stacked in stores and everything just fall out all over.
We've started shrink wrapping. I'll answer that one first, which is really problematic because the idea is the magazine's distributed very, very well, and it goes to every state. We have subscribers in every state at this point. It's very much about getting it into the hands of people who may not have access to contemporary art or contemporary culture in other forms. So the idea of shrink wrapping it and putting it on a newsstand is really depressing, but people steal CDs, things disappear, and that's okay. I mean, I think that's sort of par for the course, but particularly for that 20th issue that involves so many moving parts, it would have been disastrous to have it on a newsstand because you just can't put it back in very easily. And so we've gone back. The new issue is not shrink wrapped because I think I'd rather have a few faulty copies than not be able to give people that experience of accessing it directly. But yeah, there's a great lineage of amazing, Aspen, Nest. There are incredible magazines that have come, well before us, who've done this amazingly. The magazine is named after a creek that runs through the Catskill Mountains called the Esopus Creek. And the reference point was because we don't have any advertising and because we try very hard to be unmediated and unfiltered, the creek is this beautiful, pure, gorgeous fishing creek. People tube on it in the summer, clean, you know. Right, no, there's no relation. There's lots of interpretation of what else it could mean, but it literally is just the name of this creek. I think it means high banks in the Indian, in the Native American translation, but no, it was just literally, I was trying to reference the creek. It was a pure thing. It was, it ends up dumping into the Hudson, and it gets kind of mitigated along the way to the Hudson, but the idea is it's pure until it gets there, so hopefully trying to emulate that means that when you end up on the newsstand next to InStyle, at least you got that far without having to, you know, compromise yourself. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that at the beginning you had to go and seek the artists and the contributors for your material, but at this stage, are people seeking you?
Well, it's a little of both. It certainly gets easier as time goes on. I made a resolution to myself, having worked for a film magazine and worked for a design magazine, that I wasn't going to ever go through handlers to get to contributors. So I found that when I did scenario particularly, I would send a letter inviting, you know, a major screenwriter to write a keynote address for the issue to his agent or her agent. And I would find, you know, I would get a note back from the agent, oh, you know, Susie is not interested. She loves the idea, but, you know, very busy. And then we did a Sundance issue every year, and I'd go to Sundance, and I'd run into this person, and I'd say, I'm really sorry you couldn't do the keynote. And she would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I really didn't want, again, this whole notion of filtration. I just wanted to get it out of the way as much as possible. So it was more difficult in the beginning because we had nothing to show anyone. But I remember the first issue, we did a project with Richard Tuttle, and he was listed in the phone book. And I called him, and we met for lunch in Tribeca. And it was like a 3.5-hour conversation, and I thought, he's never going to do this, because he's this very meandering, amazing mind, an amazing artist, obviously. And at the end of the conversation, I was paying the bill, and he said, I'll do it. Yeah, no problem. But it was that kind of, I had the chance to tell him why I thought it might be interesting for him to do it, and he could look at me and say, all right, this is the man who's invested in this, and he obviously has some, you know, belief in it. And I think that's really helpful if you're asking somebody creative to do something. You want to demonstrate to them that you have a certain degree of integrity or connection to the project. So, anybody else? Oh, yep.
Can you just maybe give us a hint about a few things that are coming up?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because we're going to do something a little different with the magazine, and I can't be too explicit because we haven't announced it yet, but we're going to change the frequency. And we're going to go back to the idea of doing an issue. We're going to alternate issue and artist edition. And we're just literally finalizing the details on that. I just talked to Fred Tomaselli, who's doing a project for the next issue, which is very exciting. But it's really nebulous at this point. The idea is, you know, I think it's very important to keep it interesting to me and challenging to me, because I think once it becomes too easy and too by rote, it tends to be communicated to the audience, and that's a problem.
Where do you find the material to become interested in, to even get to know someone like Richard, or not Richard Tuttle, but someone else who isn't very well known?
Well, that's
across all of your.
Well, we have this great board of advisors, artists, writers, editors, filmmakers, you name it, and they're very assiduous about finding material for the magazine. They know what we're looking for, and they've had great suggestions. Our contributors have had amazing suggestions. Our readers have great suggestions. I go to I spend a lot of time looking at galleries and trying to keep my ear to the ground. Frankly, one of the best sources is interns. I don't have any staff, it's just me, so I have tons of interns, and they're all like 22, and they go out all night, and they know every new band, and they've been to every show. It's a fantastic resource, frankly. And then, you know, people approach us occasionally as well, but it's kind of that spectrum, pretty much. Anybody else? No.
It's not a question, but I saw the woman who had all her rejection stuff. I have a stack like this.
Oh, let's talk.
And the most interesting one, if you ever want some really interesting papers, I applied to something called Canadian banknote, which are they not print American stamps, but they make the money in Canada.
Oh.
It came back on cotton bonds paper for money. It used to be for money. And as they said, their letterhead is italical print in the corners, the old style, just swirling, whatever.
That's incredible. I mean, this is another way. You know, I give a lecture and somebody has, oh, I have this thing you should look at. I mean, it really is just being very open to things, I think, and that sounds, we should talk afterwards.
Most of the artists you mentioned were from New York, Brooklyn, Massachusetts. What are you doing to get artists from the Harper?
That's an excellent question. I'm trying really hard, actually, and we're trying to be a little more assiduous also about finding people, you know, who maybe don't have galleries at all or don't have representation in New York or LA or Chicago or Texas, for that matter. Again, I really is certainly dependent on who I can talk to and who gives me suggestions and where I can get. You know, if I'm going to be spending some time in Dallas looking around at some work here, and but no, it's an excellent question. And you know, it's interesting because we get about, I'd say 30% of our funding comes from New York State and New York City and other New York area foundations. And actually, NISCA and the DCA, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, have quotas. So you do need to make up at least 50% of your issue has to be New York-based artists. So you have to be a little, it's all very much a balancing act, but it's very important to me. We do a lot of work with European artists. I should go through the list and really reflect on how that kind of pans out as far as the US is concerned. We've done, I mean, I think we've had most states represented by artists or certainly by contributors over the past 10 years. Thank you, good question.
Is there a little bit of a challenge trying to keep the older issues of this magazine preserved? Because it looks like a lot of that stuff is, you know, almost, you know, it's stretching the value.
It's definitely, yeah. It's not, I mean, again, it's not hardbound. It's not meant to be. It's the other thing I should mention is it's sold for much less than it costs to produce, and that's part of our nonprofit mission. We depend on grants from public grants, from the NEA, from the Warhol Foundation, from individuals. It's very important that it be affordable. So for a long time, issues were $10, which is ridiculously low considering what they offer. They're now at $20, but they're substantially thicker as well. But yeah, the idea is basically to make it as affordable as possible. So what happens is it holds together, and but some people buy 2 copies so they can rip one apart and keep the other one kind of pristine. And a lot of the early issues are sold out, and so we have some archive copies left, and then those we actually sell as sets to collectors, to institutions, and they're much more expensive than the magazine. And that's kind of a way to make back the money, actually, because people who can't afford it then, you know, sort of buy issues for $3,000 for 10 issues, opposed to, you know, $20 each. So, yeah. Yeah, there's some. I think. We sent some down, actually. Yeah, they should be out there, hopefully. Anybody else? Thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you hopefully upstairs. Thank you.